Fetch lands. They all come in different shapes and prices, but they all have one thing in common. You crack them, you sack them, and hope to find the land you're looking for, just to find out that your second copy of Temple Garden is in another deck. Today we're gonna look at some other possible lands to fetch for. It's time for our beloved segment of Think outside the deck box. Welcome back everyone. In this video we're going to look at some interesting lands to put into your decks, which are also fetchable, meaning you can either get them with certain fetch lands or possible ramp spells. As we know, some ramp spells are better than others, and the lands and ramp spells I want to focus on today are the ones that don't say basic land, but the ones that just say card, which is an important difference since you can only fetch basic lands with Evolving Wilds or Harrow, but also dual lands with Marsh Flats or Nature's Lore. And don't get me wrong, there are some wonderful lands to fetch for, like triomes and dual lands. Some of them are even pauper legal, like the Snow dual lands or the Dominaria United simple tapped lands. But you probably know all that, and this is not the focus of the video. The focus of the video will be lands you probably have never heard of before. What about the Shadowmoor cycle? We have Mistvale Plains, Moonring Island, Leech-ridden Swamp, Mad Blind Mountain, and Sapseed Forest. And what connects them all is the subtype of lands, which make them wonderful targets for your Marsh Flats or your Farseek. Let's look at them for a second and see what these lands do, and maybe you want to include those lands in the one or the other deck. So all of these Shadowmoor lands come into play tapped, which is a downside, but they do tap for a colored mana, and they also tap for an ability. This whole cycle has the restriction of you controlling 2 or more permanents of the respective color, which is not hard to achieve in 1 or 2 colored decks, maybe even 3 colored decks. So the white version allows you to put any card from your graveyard under your library. The ability of the white land allows you to save any card from your graveyard. Maybe someone wants to use a Scavenging Ooze on a card you might want to play again, or Bojuka Bog your whole graveyard. And this is a wonderful ability to just save a card for later. And if you're able to play some tutors, you can get this card back into your hand real quick. Let's look at the blue version. This one allows you to get some insight of any player's top card of their library. So for 1 blue, you get some information, and you can use it at instant speed. So someone casts a Vampiric Tutor, and you get the info what they tutored for. Did they get a counterspell? Or generally you just want to tell them, sorry, you're missing another land drop. It's not up there. Next up, the black version of this cycle lets every opponent of yours lose 1 life. And this can end games. If you used it 3 times, that's already 9 damage that you did to the table. And it can come out of nowhere when someone just goes down to 1 without remembering that you have this land, and you surprise them and kill them with that. So just for the lols, but also for the powerful ability, I would put that in. It also synergizes well with all the cards that look at when some of your opponents lose life and you gain life, for example. So yeah, all the life drain decks probably also want to include this one. Now the Mad Blind Mountain has a very unique effect and allows you to shuffle your library. That's it. And this card at first appears weird, but there are some cards it synergizes well with. So for example, maybe you cast Brainstorm, put some cards on top of your library which you don't need, or how about a Sylvan Library and the other 2 cards that you left up there are unimportant to you? How about a Sensei's Divining Top or Scroll Rack? These are artifacts, so you could put them into a mono-red deck as well. Lastly, we have the Sapseed Forest, which just simply gains you 1 life, which I think is the weakest of the cycle. But then again, there are cards and decks that want to have you gain life. So in a life gain deck, probably a solid and unique card. And there are, for example, Chana decks. My wife has one, and I think she should include that. I don't think we had that on our radar when we built this deck. And generally, we are getting more and more cards that also synergize with life gain, so this card will only get better over time.
Who's that magic card?
Okay, now next up we have the common land cycle of the OG Eldraine set, which also have the basic land subtype, and are fetchable with cards that let you fetch for the land type that is not basic. All of these have in common that they give you mana of one color, and they enter the battlefield tapped if you don't control 3 or more other lands of the respective type. So if you put in the idyllic range, if you control 3 or more planes, it enters untapped, otherwise it enters tapped. And if it enters untapped, all of these have an effect. So the white one lets you add a +1/+1 counter to any creature. Very useful in my eyes, and wonderful in decks with Proliferate, or decks that generally want you to put +1/+1 counters on creatures. The next one in my eyes is the strongest one, the Mystic Sanctuary, which lets you put any instant or sorcery from your graveyard back on top of your library. So in other words, your strongest instant sorcery is back on top of your library, and you may cast it again next turn or whenever you draw another card which is not hard in blue. Similarly, the black version of this cycle allows you to put a creature card on top of your library, which is, in my eyes, okay. Normally you would like to reanimate it, but still I think it's a wonderful card, and keep in mind these are all Pauper legal, so this might even be stronger in Pauper. Dwarven Mine lets you create a 1/1 dwarf token, and I do enjoy playing that in my Gut Inspiring Leader Pauper deck, which I haven't shown on the channel yet, since it just gives me fodder to sack it again and turn it into a skeleton. And any token creation deck, or any aggro deck probably, wants to have this land in their deck as well. Lastly, the Gingerbread Cabin, again the green one I think is the weakest. It creates a food token which is useful with the Academy Manufactor, since you then create another clue and treasure token. It's probably also useful in life gain decks, and might save you a game if you're low on life.
It's Gemstone Caverns!
Now the last two fetchable unique cards before we call it quits here, and I hope you enjoyed this video so far, is on the one hand the Dryad Arbor, which you probably already know, but some of you might not know that it has a forest type and is able to be fetched with fetch lands and ramp spells, like 3 Visits or Nature's Lore for example. But always keep in mind, since it is a creature as well, as it says on the card, it does not have haste and does not tap for mana as it comes into play, if you can't give it haste in any way. Still, if you have a fetch land out and you want to fetch for a green anyways, this can be an instant speed blocker, for example, which your opponent just doesn't see, and maybe there's a big beater coming to you and it does not have trample, and you can just chump block it with your Dryad Arbor at instant speed. A thing I'm also guilty of is putting the Dryad Arbor with my lands, but it should always be visible with all your other creatures so that your opponent is not surprised by you still having this creature, or you forgetting to kill it with a board wipe. Now lastly, the Murmuring Bosque is another forest that is also a pain land and enters the battlefield tapped if you don't reveal a Treefolk card from your hands. But then it is a triome, and especially in Treefolk decks, this should always be played if you play those colors. But now I do want to hear from you, what is your favorite land to fetch for? Even if it doesn't have a basic land type, let us know in the comments. Remember to vote if you want to play a round of Magic with me in the community tab, so we can find a date. Looking forward to reading from you and hopefully soon play with you. Give the left button a boop and click the right one for another awesome video. See you there and have a good one. Bye bye.